Putin has fallen into a Ukrainian ring of fire, and he's going down, down, down as the flames grow higher. At least that must be what it feels like after Ukraine unleashed yet another firestorm of drone strikes against Russia. Oil plants, manufacturing facilities, and much more have been left in flames after Ukraine seemed to strike everything, everywhere, all at once inside Russia. This is what Putin has brought to his people. A non-stop drone swarm from which nothing can escape. Russia may be big, but Ukraine's drones are brutal, and they are crippling Russia as Putin's reputation as the strongman defender is ripped to pieces. Putin could do nothing but watch as Ukraine unleashed a massive swarm of drones against Russia on July 9th and into July 10th. By the end of the attack, Russia's defense ministry claimed that it had intercepted 376 of Ukraine's UAVs. So this isn't the biggest Ukrainian drone strike of the war. Far from it, but in terms of results, it's among the most effective. Even as Russia claims to have shot everything down, as it always does, without acknowledging that any of these drones hit their targets, fires burn, airports have been closed down, and facilities that are key to Russia's military industry and its ability to export products to other nations have suddenly developed very big holes that weren't there before. Putin, it looks like Russia's air defenses missed a few. We start with the ruination of Rostov. The Rostov Oblast borders Ukraine, which makes it an obvious target when Ukraine wants to score some quick wins with its drones, especially now that those drones pack more firepower and have more flexibility in terms of range than they ever have before. And Rostov suffered in Ukraine's overnight strikes. In Taganrog, residents reported that massive fires had broken out in the port region of the city, suggesting a strike against one of Rostov's export hubs. Xelenova Plus revealed that these reports weren't mere speculation, as it soon started sharing videos of ominous black clouds rising from the direction of the port. The Kyiv Post says that news coming from Russians who are actually willing to report what happened suggests that Ukraine scored direct hits against the Kurganovka oil depot, which is where Russian fuel and oil products go to be loaded onto Shadow Fleet ships that then take the products to whoever is willing to buy them. More videos and more smoke soon emerged on the Xelenova Plus Telegram channel, confirming that this particular port is now a flaming mess. But Ukraine was far from done with Rostov. It appears that another target was hit in Taganrog, the city's aviation college. As you'd expect from the name, the college trains specialists for Russia's aviation and engineering industries. Those types of specialists are pretty vital for Russia, given that its entire strategy for Ukraine seems to have boiled down to attacking from a distance using missiles and glide bombs launched from aircraft. And again, there are videos, this time shared to Telegram by the head of the Center for the Study of Occupation, Petro Andriushenko. Okay, Rostov's residents must have thought, that's 2 big targets hit by Ukraine's drones, surely there won't be any more. Wrong. Ukraine wasn't done with Rostov yet. This oblast is particularly important to Russia, not just because its location on the border makes it a useful launch pad for strikes, but because its ports offer Russia access to the Azov Sea. That means Rostov is vital to Putin as he attempts to maintain control over occupied Crimea, and Ukraine's series of strikes has just struck another blow that further isolates a peninsula that is already in serious trouble after months of brilliant Ukrainian middle-range strikes. Ukraine's strikes were numerous enough to put the Rostov Oblast governor, Yuri Slyozar, into panic mode. An aerial attack on the Rostov region is currently underway. During the effort to repel the attack, approximately 35 UAVs were destroyed over the cities of Taganrog and Azov, as well as the Azovsky and Matveyevo-Kurgansky districts. Unfortunately, there have been consequences on the ground, the governor claimed. We assume that consequences on the ground roughly translates to our air defenses missed a whole bunch of drones, or more accurately for Russia, our air defenses were so good that they shot everything down, and it just so happens that the debris struck the exact targets that Ukraine wanted to hit. And there were plenty more targets beyond the 2 we've already mentioned. Slyozar reports strikes in a village named Kagalnik, where he claims Ukrainian drones hit an administrative building, causing a fire but leading to no casualties. In the city of Azov itself, Ukraine's drone attack sparked massive fires at a pair of petroleum storage facilities. Those fires must have been large, as Russia doesn't tend to like exposing that it's been hit by Ukraine's drones. The fact that the Rostov governor is reporting all of this at all tells us that the flames were too intense to hide. He did stop short of actually identifying the petroleum facilities that Ukraine struck, but we don't need Slyozar for that. Selenova Plus once again comes through with the evidence, as its combination of footage and geolocation capabilities leads it to the conclusion that Ukraine likely struck either the Don Terminal oil depot or the Azov optical mechanical plant, maybe both. The sheer scale of the fire and black smoke pouring out in one of the clips the channel shares certainly indicate a strike against an oil storage unit. You don't get that sort of inferno from an attack against a regular structure. And if Ukraine also happened to hit the plant in question, then that is another major victory. The Azov optical mechanical plant makes radars, optical electronic components, and precision-guided systems that the Kyiv Post says are used in everything from aircraft and warships to Russia's armored vehicles and missiles. So pretty much everything that Russia needs to sustain Putin's invasion, no matter where the attacks come from. That all amounts to a pretty solid evening of work for Ukraine. But we told you that Ukraine hit everything everywhere all at once. And what that means is that it's not just Rostov that burns following Ukraine's drone swarm. In another Russian region, Ukraine scored a bullseye against the type of target that it has made its priority ever since Ukraine developed the long-range capabilities that make strikes like these possible in the first place. We're about to tell you where Ukraine's drone struck next, but before we do, this is your reminder that you are watching The Military Show. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the perfect time to take a second and hit the button so you never miss one of our videos. Done? Good. Let's move on to the Krasnodar Cry crippling. In its report on Ukraine's insane night of strikes, the Kyiv Independent revealed that Ukraine's drones once again smashed into the Ilsky oil refinery in the Krasnodar region. Located about 500 kilometers away from Ukrainian-controlled territory, that refinery is no stranger to Ukraine's drones. If anything, the drones have become regular visitors. July 10th marked the 17th time that this specific refinery has been hit since the beginning of the war, and it was last targeted on June 2nd. It almost seems like Ukraine's drone operators have some sort of grudge. However, what's really happening here is that Ukraine repeatedly strikes a refinery that is capable of processing up to 6.6 million tons of fuel every year, because repeated strikes make it impossible for Russia to ever get the refinery fully online. Whenever whatever Ukraine hit last time is on the verge of being repaired, here comes these flying sanctions again, ready to take out another target. You might think that Russia would have figured out after 17 strikes that it may need some air defenses at Ilsky. Maybe it has, and it just doesn't have the defenses to spare. Regardless, more fires burn at a refinery that is begging for some sort of relief from Ukraine's drones. Once again, Selenova Plus has the footage, as we see a fire burning at Ilsky, set against the night sky. As for the authorities in the region, the operational headquarters of Krasnodar Cry said, "A fire broke out at the Ilsky oil refinery in the Siberia district due to falling UAV debris. There it is. We were waiting for the D word to pop up, and Krasnodar Cry's authorities didn't disappoint. The world's most accurate drone debris appears to have struck again, for the 17th time in total and the 5th time in 2026 alone. We don't even think we have it in us to be sarcastic anymore. This debris excuse is getting old, especially when that debris never seems to fall harmlessly kilometers away from Ukraine's target." So the Ilsky oil refinery burned once more, which really isn't going to do Russia any favors when it comes to dealing with the fuel crisis that is roaring through the entire country right now. Plus, burning fuel and oil means fewer exports, which means money out of the Kremlin's war chest. There's one more location that came under attack from Ukraine's drones to round out the night of strikes, and it's no less than Russia's capital city, Moscow. We would love to tell you that Ukraine's drones scored strike after strike against key military targets. A Moscow mutilation, to stick with our alliterative theme. However, that isn't the case. Ukraine sent drones, but Russia claims to have intercepted them all, and there are no reports that contradict Russia's claims. However, what Ukraine did manage to do with an attack that Moscow Mayor Sergei Sobyanin said amounted to 16 drones was force the temporary suspension of the Domodedovo airport. And just for good measure, the Pulkovo airport in St. Petersburg ended up dealing with the same types of restrictions, suggesting that a few of Ukraine's drones made the trip to Putin's hometown. Is this as impressive as what Ukraine pulled off in Rostov and Krasnodar Cry? Perhaps not. But there are two things that Ukraine has achieved by sending its drones over to Moscow. First, the airport closure feeds into one of the main reasons why Ukraine conducts deep strikes, which is to bring the war that Putin started back to Russia's people. We'll be digging deeper into that concept in a moment. But the point here is that an airport that suspends flights due to a drone attack is an airport that winds up being filled with angry people who have spent a lot of money only to be confronted with the war that they're trying to avoid. Ukraine has even made it a point to note that airport closures are part of the pressure campaign that Ukraine is using against Russia. Back in May 2025, the Kyiv Independent reported that Ukraine's drones had caused 217 airport closures between January 1st and May 22nd. The spokesperson for the Ukraine Defense Army's Southern Division, Serhiy Bratchuk, said at the time, "These disruptions are not accidental. They are part of a pressure campaign against logistics, air defense systems, and public morale. The Russian population has to pay for this war. Sleeping in tents at the airport is not the highest price, but it does affect morale." It's a unique way to make the Russian people pay. But being forced to sleep on a cold airport floor or battle it out with other people for the few chairs available is a good way to send a reminder to Moscow's people that their president started a war that he can't finish. And speaking of reminders, that brings us to the second thing that Ukraine's strikes in Moscow achieved. They forced Putin to remember that Ukraine can strike Russia's capital. It's done so several times in 2026 already. The end of June saw Ukraine strike a satellite center in the Russian capital. Before that, in the middle of the same month, Ukraine launched one of its largest aerial assaults yet, hitting the main Moscow oil refinery, leading to residents moaning about the black rain that resulted from the burning oil. Putin is now very aware that Ukraine has drones that can not only reach Moscow, but can blow important energy and military infrastructure to bits. Russia's leader will be counting his lucky stars after the July 10th strike that just led to an airport closure. But he shouldn't. What we've likely just seen from Ukraine is a prelude, an appetizer before another main course, where fire comes to a Russian capital city that is far more vulnerable now than it has ever been under Putin's reign. Let's pull back and look at July 10th through a wider lens. As a day of strikes, it was immense. Oil depots, refineries, and military facilities were all struck, and there was that nice little Moscow reminder to boot. But what Ukraine really showed Russia, as it created yet another ring of fire across all of Russia, is, well, just that. Ukraine's drones can now reach almost any target of military importance inside Russia, and there's nothing that Russia can do about it. If anything, the July 10th strike was small fry, at least when it comes to the expanding range of Ukraine's strike potential. It sounds crazy to say that, given that many of Ukraine's drones traveled 1,000 kilometers to reach their targets, which would have been an unthinkable achievement when Putin launched his invasion. But it's the truth. Ukraine can strike a lot deeper than July 10th indicates, and that will have Putin leaving wet patches in his pants. We saw the most remarkable evidence for this just a couple of days before the most recent flurry, as the news broke that Ukraine has scored direct hits at the Omsk refinery in Siberia. We'll say that again, Siberia. That's more than 2,500 kilometers away from Ukraine. And it appears that Ukraine used a new version of the FP-1 drone that can travel that far to do the deed. That's a new distance record for Ukraine's drones, and by some margin. And what it tells Putin and his people is a simple message that Ukraine wants to have ringing out from the halls of the Kremlin to the Russian Far East. Nothing is safe anymore. And Russia knows it. As far back as March, Russian officials have been delivering this warning. Sergei Shoigu, who is the secretary of Russia's Security Council, as well as the country's former defense minister, said as much during a meeting in the Urals, where he discussed not only Ukraine's long-range drones, but a spate of sabotage attacks that had taken place around that time. The pace of development of weapon systems, primarily unmanned drone systems, and the sophistication of the methods used to deploy them are such that no region of Russia can feel safe, Shoigu declared. That's at least one Russian official who is willing to point out the truth. That truth is that Russia's backline has disappeared. Its rear is now vulnerable, and it's not just Shoigu who says it. Russia's military bloggers, who for so long have trumpeted Moscow's supposed military dominance as they advocate for a no-holds-barred beatdown of Ukraine, have come to the realization that Ukraine is getting the upper hand on Russia. What Russia is dealing with now is the upending of a whole bunch of assumptions that were made before Putin launched his invasion. Ukraine wasn't supposed to be able to do any of this. But now, deep strikes are an almost daily occurrence in Russia. Psychologically, that fact is having an impact on Russia's people, and it's causing Putin's hold over them to loosen. Remember, Putin is a man who has built his reputation out of appearing strong to his people, even when it's been evident to others that he is far weaker than he claims to be. The great defender is being exposed as a foolish pretender, as he can no longer shield ordinary Russians from the consequences of the war. Strikes like those we saw on July 10th are forcing a change in public discourse that is as evident on social media as it is in the halls of Russia's Security Council. As the Atlantic Council put it in the wake of a June strike against St. Petersburg, The changing tone in Russia's public discourse owes much to Ukraine's increasingly effective strategic bombing campaign, which is becoming far more difficult to downplay or ignore. Footage of explosions now floods Russian social media daily, with recent attacks on the Moscow region striking a particularly raw nerve. We couldn't have said it any better ourselves. Every time that Ukraine jams another drone into that nerve by taking out a refinery or destroying a depot, it sends a reminder to Russia's people that none of this had to happen. Ukraine didn't want this war, Putin did. And that makes Putin the reason why they're feeling so much pain. This is just Ukraine turning Russia's own tactics against it, albeit in a way that hurts Russia's people without directly targeting them. Russia's own aerial campaign is based on terror. Putin is as happy to strike Ukraine's cities and kill civilians as he is to hit a military target because everything that Russia does against Ukraine is coercive. An attempt by Putin to convince Ukraine's people to give up their resistance and let Russia have its way. All that Ukraine is now doing is using its own version of that type of coercive campaign to inflict the same type of psychological pressure on the Russian people without resorting to the war crimes that Putin commits. And finally, we just spoke about pressure. Don't forget one of the targets that Ukraine hit on July 10th, the Ilsky oil refinery. When we talk about pressure, we can't ignore Russia's fuel crisis. If the fires on the horizon are a reminder that Putin's war has come home, the massive queues at the poorly stocked fuel pumps in Russia are a far more tangible pain being delivered to the Russian people. A fuel crisis that started in Crimea has now spread all across Russia, and it gets worse every time a refinery that is responsible for making fuel burns. DW reports on one Russian woman in the Gelendzhik region who claims to have spent 3 days trying to fill up her car. She spends nights sleeping in the vehicle and arrives at gas stations as early as 5 a.m., only to find the pumps are still empty. That isn't a one-off. It's a reality for many in Russia as they spend hours waiting in queues for the one product that is supposed to be plentiful in their country because Russia makes the stuff. Ukraine has transformed what was once a fight for its own survival into a nightmare for Russia. July 10th means that Russia's dreadful dream will last even longer. For many in Russia, the queues at the pumps are simply too much. Fights are breaking out. There is a shitstorm breaking out, literally. If you're wondering what we mean by that less than savory teaser, then you need to check out our video, where we analyze the chaos in the gas station queues throughout Russia. And if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to The Military Show and spend a little time with our channel. We publish videos daily, so you get your fix of the latest developments in the Ukraine war. And thank you, as always, for watching.